Subaru had already died twice in his current loop, and he understood that the witch cult's madman, Betelgeuse Romanicanti, was the source of the massacre that kept destroying the village and Roswell's mansion. So he decided he had to gather strength and kill Betelgeuse to break the cycle of tragedy. He calculated that he had at most 4.5 days before the cult's raid would happen again, which meant travel time alone left him with very little room to act, pushing him to seek military help beyond Roswell's household. Since Roswell himself was missing during the attacks in his prior loops, convinced that only real power and numbers could stop the witch cult, Subaru went to the royal capital and requested an audience with Crush Karsten, whose house had discipline, soldiers, and seasoned retainers like Wilhelm, the sword devil, as well as Ferris, a skilled healer and water mage. At the gate, the Merchant Guild's treasurer Russell Fellow departed after meeting Crush, and Wilhelm noted that Subaru's eyes had changed and carried a dark glint, recognizing in him the same hatred that burns inside a person who has lost something unforgivable, which made Rem worry as she held Subaru's sleeve a little tighter. When Subaru finally faced Crush, he bluntly asked for troops to crush the witch cult that was about to attack Roswell's lands. But Crush pressed him for clear reasons, benefits, and proof. Because a negotiation requires mutual advantage and credible information, not just a plea. Subaru argued Emilia's side lacked manpower to repel attacks on multiple fronts and tried to frame the request as an emergency. But Crush immediately pointed out that asking another lord to save Emilia's territory would look like proof Emilia was unfit to rule, making such help itself a blow that could push Emilia out of the royal selection. When Subaru said saving lives mattered more than the election, Crush rejected the request anyway, stating that Emilia's lack of capacity to protect her people was not Crush's responsibility, and that simply allowing natural consequences to unfold would remove a rival without Crush having to intervene and attract the other's enmity, which meant there was no reasonable benefit for her side in taking the risk. Crush then raised a deeper concern. The witch cult is secretive and opaque, so how could Subaru possibly know exactly when and where they would strike unless he was part of them or had some equally extraordinary and verifiable source? And since he could not disclose his reason, his credibility collapsed. Rem tried to defend him, but Crush kept pushing the logical point that without verifiable grounds or a mandate to negotiate on Emilia's behalf, Subaru had no standing, and the rage and bloodlust in his eyes suggested his motive was hatred rather than duty, which made him unfit to be a negotiator in the first place. Subaru pleaded, saying the witch cult would kill the villagers and that not acting would be sloth, repeating the cult's own sinful language. But Crush replied that she could tell he truly believed what he said, and that was precisely what made him dangerous. A madman convinced of his private truth is not lying, but is impossible to rely upon for statecraft. When Subaru's grief and anger made him grip a spoon like a weapon without realizing it, Wilhelm stepped in, Rem stopped him, and Ferris warned him not to try violence, after which Subaru stormed out, calling Crush a future despot, and Rem thanked Crush for her earlier hospitality before following him into the night outside. Subaru seethed that his right action was blocked by people who had not seen the ruined village and the frozen corpses, but even then he forced himself to focus on the next move, believing he would find another way to get fighting power quickly. On the street, Rem told him Roswell would be absent for several days, visiting an important person in the domain, which explained the mansion's weakness when the cult struck, and that fact deepened Subaru's urgency to find allies in the capital that very day or the next morning at the latest. With Reinhardt away from the capital and the knights distrusted after earlier conflicts, Subaru targeted another royal candidate known for sharp taste and overwhelming presence, and he headed to the mansion that glared like gold in the morning sun, the home of Priscilla Burial and her masked retainer, Al. Al explained that Priscilla was awake and would see Subaru, but because the princess considered herself the cutest in the world and liked to surround herself with extravagance, the mansion had no maids and instead employed a pretty boy butler named Schult, whom Al assigned to escort Rem elsewhere, while Subaru went up alone to face Priscilla in her private room. Inside the gilded, cavernous suite, Priscilla sat on a raised chair in a red negligee and cape, absorbed in a book with an air of absolute self-confidence. And after finishing, she judged it boring only because it had nothing to teach her. burned it with a casual flick, and invited Subaru to present a more interesting tale with his words. Subaru repeated a revised version of his pitch. The witch cult planned to attack Roswell's domain soon. Many would die, and he wanted to stop them first, asking Priscilla to lend strength. But she burst into mocking laughter and called his actions a farce because he had walked into a rival's house to admit weakness and beg for aid, effectively handing enemies leverage and reasons to gloat. She pointed out that going around telling the opposition that Emilia's camp was desperate and underpowered was the height of foolishness, something a useless subordinate would do before being fired, and she told him death might be preferable to such incompetent conduct. Without warning, Priscilla drew close and set the edge of her ornate fan against Subaru's carotid as quickly as a master of arms, proving how slow and outclassed he was, then pulled the fan back and said that while his devotion to his master was at least admirable, she would grant him an opportunity to satisfy her taste for dominance. Priscilla flicked her fan into his forehead to tip him backward, then presented her bare foot and ordered him to lick it, framing submission to her as the only currency that could purchase even a shred of her help, which made clear that any cooperation under her terms would come at the cost of Subaru's dignity and agency. Even before this humiliation, Priscilla had already dismissed his reasoning because he had no credible proof to time the cult's attack, no political standing to negotiate on Emilia's behalf, and no beneficial angle for her camp, and her demand merely put a cruel seal on that rejection. After leaving Priscilla's mansion, Subaru's next options were even fewer. Reinhard was away, the knights were out of the question, Roswell was gone for days, and Krush had turned him down. So the only path left was to rush home regardless, or find merchants and adventurers outside the great houses who might be persuaded by money and opportunity, which is why he turned to Otto and planned a fast departure. The next morning, Subaru and Rem hired passage with Otto Suin, a merchant with sharp survival instincts. Because speed was everything, and any half-day saved might avoid the cult's schedule. Yet this haste rolled them toward another calamity neither of them had properly accounted for: the terror that shuts the highway and erases people. As night fell on their second day out, thick mist rolled across the road, a roar tore through the air, and a massive shadow swam in the sky. Otto screamed that it was the white whale, the scourge merchants feared most, the monster whose fog closed roads and crushed caravans, and the next breath brought a blast that splintered Subaru's freight carriage into pieces and slaughtered the land dragon in an instant. Rem grabbed Subaru by the collar and leaped with him onto Otto's wagon just in time, then drove Mana into 3 spears of ice and fired them like ballista bolts into the fog, shattering the darkness ahead. But the mist only thickened, and visibility fell to nothing. As Otto's dragon fled forward in blind terror, Subaru and Rem clung to the deck while Otto babbled prayers, and Subaru, who had only heard the name of the white whale back in the capital, now felt the hopeless weight of the legend as it hunted them from above, unseen, a living disaster that swallowed people and memories alike. The last clear sight Subaru had, in that choking white night, was Rem's silhouette straining to protect him, while the world vanished into fog, and in the chaos that followed, the whale's power to erase left Subaru alone with a gap he could not name, because the creature had more than mass and mist. It had the ability to remove a person from memory as if they had never existed. When the morning came and he staggered back to the capital in shock, Subaru discovered that no one remembered Rem's name or face or bond. Even her sister's memory of her was gone, and the hole carved out by the whale made Subaru's isolation total, so that he was the only one who knew what had been taken. Stumbling through the capital, half delirious, Subaru tried to explain that someone precious was missing, but because the whale had erased all traces, his words sounded like madness to others, which sharpened the same suspicion Krush had voiced earlier and made every door feel locked to him. He went to Emilia because he believed she was the one person he had to save, but the toll of his failures weighed heavily on him, and the curse on his heart still punished him whenever he tried to speak about return by death, sending a cold, unseen hand to crush his chest the moment he neared the truth, each time he reached for the words that would explain everything, that he had died, restarted, watched them all die, and learned the timing of the cult attack, The hush of death pressed around him. Blackness crept into his vision, and terror spread across Emilia's face as she saw him smother on empty air Subaru, trapped between the impossibility of telling the truth and the urgency of warning her, thrashed against the walls of his cage and said half-true things with broken anger, which only hurt Emilia and pushed her further away. The opposite of what he wanted. He ran from room to room of hope and found only voids where Rem's name used to live. So even seeking comfort turned bitter because the whale had made him the sole witness to a theft that no one else could perceive. In that pain, the accusation that he was driven by hatred seemed to stick, making him fear that his will to crush Betelgeuse had begun outweighing his will to save, which was exactly the trap Crush had warned him about in their negotiation. The more he forced his bruised pride to act alone, the more he was punished, and when he hit the limit of what he could endure, humiliation and self-loathing swallowed him on Main Street, where he crouched down, feeling like everything he touched fell apart. It was there that Rem found him, because even though the whale had erased her from the world's memory, she still lived in this turn of the loop, and she came to his side with quiet resolve, seeing through his anger to the wounded core that still wanted to help people. Rem told him to breathe and to let go of his frantic need to shoulder everything by himself, because that loneliness had led him to bad bargains, bad words, and bad outcomes, and she asked him to start again from a place of honesty rather than wounded pride. When he tried to dismiss himself as useless and broken, Rem answered with a steady voice and a long, gentle vision of a life where they left all of this behind, moved to a small village, built a home, worked hard, laughed, and raised children, painting a possible future in simple colors to show him he still had a choice. In that imagined life, she confessed that she loved him fully, not as a reward for heroics, but as a truth that stood even when he failed, and she promised she would walk beside him even if the world called him a fool, because she could see the person he was trying to be beneath the fear and anger. Subaru listened, cried, and finally said he loved Emilia. Not because Rem's love was small, but because his heart had chosen another path, and he begged Rem not to vanish from that path, which could have broken any other heart. But Rem smiled through the pain and said that his honesty was exactly why she believed in him. With those words, she lifted him back to his feet, telling him to begin from zero. No more pretending, no more rage-fueled bargains, only clear goals and clear exchanges. And Subaru accepted, because her trust gave him the courage to change his approach. The turn from despair to resolve began there on that street, with Rem's hand on his sleeve and his decision to stop flailing and start thinking like someone who knew he could not win alone, which meant building an offer the other side could not refuse on its own terms. Subaru returned to the negotiation table with a new plan that did not ask others to save Emilia for free or on pity, but instead offered them concrete gains they wanted for themselves, starting with Crush Karsten and those aligned with her. He arranged a meeting in Crush's reception room and assembled key figures: Crush, Ferris, Wilhelm, and Russell Fellow, the merchant guild treasurer who could smell profit and understood how to mobilize capital quickly if a deal looked juicy enough. When Crush asked him to state the purpose, Subaru did not play coy and declared he wanted an equal alliance between Emilia's camp and Crush's camp, built on a joint operation with measurable upside for Crush's side, and he promised that one more invited guest, a nose for money, would arrive shortly to hear the pitch. Subaru then explained that the highway had been sealed by the white whale's fog, that the creature was hunting near the capital's approach, and that every merchant knew the damage it could inflict, which meant the one who slew it would gain tremendous prestige and tangible rewards from every corner of trade and travel in Lagunica. He highlighted that Wilhelm, Crush's retainer, had a personal history with the whale and a sword honed for the hunt, and Russell would understand the immediate market upside in capturing bounties, restoring trade flows, and owning the story of the hunt to bargain better terms with guilds, caravans, and nobles who had suffered losses for years. This reframed the situation from help Emilia, a rival, to seize the chance to kill the white whale and take the profits, renown, and moral authority that come with that victory. And it aligned perfectly with Crush's values of discipline, accountability, and accomplishments that could be measured on the public stage. Subaru did not ask Crush to stake her name on Emilia's weakness. He invited her to lead a hunt that would make her even more of a favorite for the crown by proving that under her command, an ancient scourge could be destroyed. And he placed Emilia's aid as a supportive role within the larger operation. Ferris bristled at Subaru's sudden confidence and watched for traps. But even he had to admit that this time Subaru wasn't trading on pity or empty claims. He was leveraging a visible, shared enemy and a ledger of gains that Crush's side could count in coin, influence, and faith from the people. Wilhelm said little, but his presence was the quiet hammer in the plan, because any path to the whale would have his blade at the tip, and that truth carried more weight in this room than 100 slogans could ever muster. Russell chuckled when Subaru said the absent guest would attend because she smells money, and the merchant admitted that this was exactly the sort of big-shot deal people like that could not resist, especially if they could attach their brands to the victory at minimal risk. Rem moved in silence behind Subaru like a steady anchor, and when she whispered that the guest had sent word she would be slightly late but would come, Subaru thanked her and pushed into the heart of the pitch, with all the calm he had found since choosing to start from zero. Every line of the new negotiation aimed to make Crush's acceptance the rational choice for her own ambition, while simultaneously unlocking the cavalry and logistics Subaru needed to turn and face the witch cult after the whale fell, because only a coalition could smash both threats in sequence. Crush tested Subaru's framing with pointed questions and a hard gaze. But this time, Subaru did not wilt or lash out. He showed that he understood the stakes in the balance sheet, and he spoke like someone who had learned how to separate a private wound from a public deal. He did not hide his hatred of the witch cult, but he refused to make that emotion the spine of the argument. Instead, he put forward timelines, staging, and mutual roles. Crush's camp leads the whale hunt at a landmark the creature favors, and merchants co-sponsor and supply, while Emilia's people provide support and then receive backing when the joint force turns immediately toward Roswell's domain afterward. Where earlier he had begged Crush to save a rival, now he offered her the glory of a great hunt and a platform to demonstrate rule in action, contain disaster, restore trade, inspire trust, and then be seen riding to the next fight with momentum and allies at her side. Ferris still worried about what Subaru had left unsaid, especially about why he knew danger would hit Roswell's lands right after. But even he could see that any success against the whale would start a chain of good outcomes, and that refusing the chance would look timid to the public. Wilhelm's eyes, closed through much of the meeting, opened at the edges when the whale became the central lever. Because for him, the hunt meant more than bounties. It meant finishing an old story that had cut deep into his life, and the thought of leading blades to that kill tightened the air with intent. Russell asked Subaru for the short list of financial props: who pays, who collects, who signs the endorsements, how the narrative moves through the guilds. And Subaru answered with the confidence of someone who had spent the last day turning all his fear into a ledger of incentives for every actor who might join. The slightly late guest's impending arrival mattered because her name and purse could lighten Crush's burden while multiplying prestige, and Subaru knew enough of her reputation to promise that if the deal smelled like profit and attention, she would slide in with a scarf and a smile. With that expectation on the table, Subaru closed by saying plainly that he was not asking anyone to abandon rivalries forever. He was offering a narrow bridge over a shared abyss. First to fell the whale and then to crush the cult that preyed on fear. While good people argued procedure, Crush, who prized results built on discipline, recognized that this bridge did not demand she betray her standards. Instead, it invited her to prove those standards could beat nightmares. And that recognition turned her earlier refusal into a thoughtful silence that felt very close to assent. Rem, who had told Subaru to start from zero, watched him stand straighter without arrogance. And that small change, no tantrum, no self-pity, only a firm offer, proved that the promise she drew out of him on the street was already becoming action. The room's tension shifted from skepticism to calculation, the kind of hush that settles before signatures. And in that hush, Subaru held his ground and waited for the final piece to step through the door so the alliance could be sealed by pride, profit, in a shared hunt. By the time every face was present, Subaru's equal terms line had transformed the whole topic from charity to opportunity. Even Ferris's narrowed eyes relaxed enough to consider logistics instead of dismissal, because he could see the battlefield being drawn in clean lines at last, not in muddled pleas. Krush summarized the position with crisp economy. There would be no aid for Emilia's arrival, but there could be a joint campaign with Krush in command to slay the white whale with merchant backing and then march the combined force to strike at the witch cult before it could butcher another village, which let her bank victory twice on her own merits. Wilhelm accepted his silent assignment at the tip of that spear, and Russell's chuckle meant he already saw sponsorships and guild resolutions drafting themselves the moment the whale's corpse hung in the sky, because that image would travel faster than any proclamation and make coin jingle wherever it landed. Subaru did not forget the moral center of the plan, saving the people the cult would kill, and he made sure the sequence moved quickly from whale to cult, because delay would mean another reset of blood and ice in a village that had already died too many times in his mind. The difference from his first negotiation was total. Where he had once asked Krush to risk her crown to save a rival, now he invited her to win the crown by saving the roads, the trade, the people, and then the village, all in a straight campaign that served Emilia's side incidentally by serving the nation openly. Krush's final look said she understood that this time he was not a man bargaining from wounded pride, but a man matching his need to other people's wants. And when she moved from no to let us proceed correctly, the entire room exhaled as if a long-held breath had been released. The plan they began to shape would carry them to a colossal tree and into a night sky where a mountain-sized shadow would be dragged into a crossfire of blades, spells, and courage. And when it fell, the story would turn at last toward the forest road where cultists in black robes waited to carve hatred into the world. Subaru's heart, which had been crushed by silence and fear when he tried to speak the forbidden truth, now beat steady because he did not need to say everything to do the right thing. He only needed to build a path others wanted to walk that ended at the same rescue he could not stop imagining. Rem's hand, light on his sleeve, reminded him that he had not climbed out alone, and that from zero meant exactly this: standing up without lies, turning love into resolve, and converting resolve into clear offers, clear roles, and victories that left no one erased when morning came. With that, the curtain on this phase fell not in humiliation, but in readiness. A coalition formed around a hunt for a monstrous in the fog, a march to smash a cult of madness, and a boy who had finally learned how to ask for help in a way that made others proud to give it.